A ruthless soldier, a captive girl with fire in her eyes, and a past that refuses to stay buried in the unforgiving Arizona desert. What happens when a man who chose silence is forced to fight for his soul? Wherever you're watching from, drop a comment below and let us know. If these stories grip your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe because this is just the beginning. They say silence can heal a man, but I've learned that it can just as easily rot him from the inside out. For 8 long years, the Arizona sun baked my ranch into a brittle husk, just like it did my soul. I lived in that emptiness by choice, wrapped in the dry wind and red dust, hoping that the ghosts in my head would tire of whispering. But ghosts don't grow weary, they just wait. The day they rode in, it wasn't the crack of gunfire or thunder that broke my quiet exile. It was the dull rhythm of hooves beating down the old trail, pulling a shroud of dust behind them like a funeral procession. I watched them from the porch, sweat trickling down my neck, hand resting on a splintered post that had known more truth than my tongue ever dared speak. At first, I thought it might be just another patrol. The army passed through these parts, often enough pale men in faded blue, carrying rifles heavier than their conviction. But leading them was a man carved straight from the marrow of my regrets, Cade Mallory. A name that had burned my conscience raw every sleepless night. Even after all these years, the sight of him churned my gut. The same cruel twist to his mouth, the same lazy confidence of someone who thought the world owed him fear. I could almost taste the stale whiskey on his breath from where I stood. Behind him, roped together and choking on dust, were Apache prisoners, men beaten down by iron chains and sunburned days. But among them was one that the desert itself seemed to refuse to swallow. A girl couldn't have been older than 20. Skin the color of sun-warmed earth, black hair stuck to her face with sweat, but her chin stayed high, her dark eyes steady even as the soldiers jeered. In that glance, there was something that felt like a spark flickering in the ruins of a burned-out home. She didn't lower her gaze, not even as Cade swung himself off his horse, spurs jingling like laughter in a graveyard. I stayed silent. That had been my way, for so long silent, enough to almost forget how words felt rolling off my tongue. But Cade always did love dragging the past out where it could bleed. His eyes met mine, and that smirk crawled across his face, a smirk I knew too well. He yanked the rope and dragged the girl forward, shoving her toward my water trough. "The men are thirsty," he rasped, voice rough as rust, "and so are our guests." She stumbled, knees buckling, hands scraping against the wood, but she didn't cry out, didn't whimper. She looked at me, straight through me, and for a moment, under that merciless sun, I saw another face. 19 years old, shivering under a pine ridge at Wolf Creek Pass, Private Josiah Miller. The boy I failed. My hand curled tighter around the fence post until splinters bit deep enough to remind me I was still here, that I still had skin that could bleed. Cade leaned close to her, his words meant for my ears alone. "Drink up, savage," he hissed, courtesy of the man who leaves his own behind. The words hit me like a rifle butt to the ribs. Years of silence cracked, but not enough to break. I stood there, a statue of rotted conscience, wanting to look away, wanting to scream, doing nothing. When you live too long with guilt, you learn to let moments pass you by. You teach yourself that survival means inaction, that a locked door keeps out more than just the cold. But those eyeshures were louder than Cade's taunts. They dared me to remember the man I once was, and for the first time in years, I let shame breathe. It's strange how a single breath can weigh more than 8 years of silence. I remember standing there, sweat trickling down my back, mouth dry as the canyon dust. The world felt suspended in that heartbeat, Cade's eyes daring me to move, the girl's gaze challenging me not to. My ribs felt like a cage, my lungs fluttering like a trapped bird. I had built my life out here to forget, built it board by board, each nail hammered in with guilt and regret. This ranch had become my prison and my refuge all at once. Every sunrise and every dying ember of the day reminded me that I had chosen quiet over penance. But shame is a living thing. It doesn't grow weaker in the dark, it sharpens its teeth. As Cade's men shifted in their saddles, Impatient under the hot sun, I stayed frozen. I heard the leather creak, the distant caw of a crow perched somewhere beyond the fence line. But all I really saw was the way that girl refused to bow her head. Her wrists were bound, her dress ragged and stained with sweat and dirt, but there was something stubborn in the line of her shoulders. My mind slipped back uninvited to Wolf Creek Pass. I can still see the frost steaming off the rocks that morning, the pine needles slick with ice, Miller's voice trembling when he called for help, and my own finger hesitating on the trigger. 1 second, that was all it took to change a man from a protector into a coward. Cade turned from her, his hand resting casually on the rifle slung across his chest. His smirk told me he remembered that moment just as well as I did, and he knew what it cost me every day. He didn't need to draw his gun to wound me. His words cut deeper than any blade. I should have turned away, should have let them pass, like I had so many times before. But there's a line in every man's soul, a threshold, and I didn't know I'd crossed it until my body moved on its own. The moment felt clumsy, almost foolish. I turned as if to step back into my cabin. My heel caught a rock, or maybe it was just my own hesitation made manifest. I stumbled, hand shooting out to steady myself, and in that stagger, my palm slammed into the bucket balanced on the rain barrel. The crash of water hitting dry earth was like thunder ripping through the stillness. Cade's horse reared, nostrils flaring, hooves striking the air. The sudden chaos spread, like wildfire soldiers shouting, reins snapping, horses panicking into one another. In that storm of confusion, I saw her move, quick as a desert fox. She fell forward, hands brushing the dirt, but they didn't stay empty. They came up with a shard of stone sharp enough to tear through rope. Her movements were desperate, frantic. The stone bit into her wrist, drawing blood, but she didn't stop. The fibers frayed and then gave way. She didn't look at me, didn't thank me, she just ran. Not out into the open plain where Cade's men could hunt her down in moments. She bolted toward the labyrinth of canyons that split my land. Cracks and gullies older than memory, carved by ancient floods. I had walked those canyons more times than I could count, mapping them in my head until they felt like an extension of my own ribs. And in that moment, I knew she had a chance. Cade's roar cut through the dust. His face, usually smug and composed, twisted into raw fury. "After her," he bellowed, voice cracking with hate. A few soldiers kicked their mounts forward, but the canyon mouth swallowed her whole. The walls, jagged and narrow, were a graveyard for horses that dared enter at speed. And as the first man pulled up cursing, I saw doubt take root in their eyes. "Damn you, Thorn." The words spat from Cade's lips like venom. "This is on you," he growled. "I'll be back for her, and for you." He spat in the dirt, swung his horse around, and with a final hateful glare, led his men away. The dust settled slower than my pulse. My hand still hovered near the empty bucket, my breath ragged. I had broken the silence that kept me safe, and in doing so, I had invited every consequence I had spent 8 years running from. The ranch felt different now, the air heavier, the boards older and frailer. The walls I'd trusted to keep the past out now felt like a cage built by my own cowardice. But there, beyond those walls, a life was running, hurt, alone, hunted. I could have let it end there, locked my door, pretended none of it happened, told myself I'd done enough. But my boots were already moving before the thought could even settle, toward the shed where my old rifle lay buried in dust, toward the canyons where the night was beginning to gather. I didn't know what I would find in that darkness, but I knew one truth clearer than I had known anything in years. A man who watches someone else bleed for his silence doesn't deserve another sunrise. Night comes fast in the Arizona canyons. One moment the sun is clawing at your back, burning every regret into your skin. The next, darkness pours down like water into every crack and hollow, swallowing shapes and shadows alike. I stepped past the fence line as the last light bled out of the sky, the boards groaning under my boots as if they too knew what I was about to do. For years, those boards had been my confession booth, my fortress. I had convinced myself they could keep the past out. But I was wrong. Guilt seeps through wood and stone alike. My hand brushed against the old rifle hanging by the door, the barrel pitted with rust, the wood scarred and dry. It had been my companion in the war, the one I had held at Wolf Creek when I froze. The memory stung, but I took it anyway, because going into the night empty-handed felt like asking for more punishment than even I deserved. I didn't light the lantern. Out here, light is as dangerous as a shout in a silent church. The moon hung low, a brittle shard of bone in a sky drowning in stars. It was enough. Every rock and ridge had become part of me in these years. Even blindfolded, I could have traced the path through the winding canyons. But tonight felt different. The air itself felt charged, humming with the consequences of what I had done. As I descended into the first narrow gully, the scent of creosote and dry earth rose around me. Each step kicked up dust, whispering secrets to the night. Somewhere above, an owl called a low, haunting note that made the silence feel even deeper. I listened for anything human, a gasp, a footstep, the crack of a branch. But the canyons only offered back the restless beat of my own heart. She was out there, bleeding, hunted, and all I had given her was a handful of seconds and a path into darkness. It felt like too little, but it was all I had. My mind wouldn't let go of her ice, the stubborn defiance that had refused Cade's cruelty. It reminded me of something I hadn't felt in so long that it felt foreign: hope. And hope is dangerous when you've taught yourself to live without it. I climbed down a steep ledge, boots skidding on loose gravel. A few stones clattered into the shadows below, and for a moment I froze, listening. Nothing but my own ragged breath came back. The canyons were playing their old tricks, amplifying every small sound until it felt like a shout. I forced myself to move, sliding along the rock face. The rifle weighed heavy in my hand, the wood familiar yet foreign after so many silent years. My shoulder ached under its pull, reminding me of wounds that never truly healed. When I reached the floor of the canyon, the air felt cooler, trapped in the narrow walls. Sagebrush scratched at my legs as I pushed through, searching for signs: disturbed dust, a broken branch, a drop of blood. I found them, small things at first. A scuffed patch of earth where someone had stumbled, a smear of something dark on a rock edge, catching moonlight like ink. My pulse quickened, hope warring with dread. Was she still moving, or had the desert already claimed her? I crouched and ran my hand over the stain. Still wet, fresh, my gut twisted. The stone had freed her, but it had cost her flesh. She was close. Pushing deeper into the canyon, memories trailed me like shadows. Wolf Creek again, Miller's lifeless eyes, Cade's smirk when he realized I had frozen, the heat of my own shame stronger than any campfire. I had run from it all, building walls of silence and dust. But no matter how far a man runs, memory runs faster. A faint rustle ahead snapped me back. I froze, breath caught in my chest, listening. There it was again, a scrape of rock against rock, too deliberate to be the wind. Slowly, carefully, I edged closer. A few more steps, heart hammering against my ribs, sweat stinging my eyes. Then I saw her, huddled under an overhang, her body curled in on itself, shoulders trembling. The rope still hung from one wrist, the stone shard clutched in her bloodied hand. Her hair fell across her face, hiding her eyes, but the set of her jaw was still stubborn, still alive. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her breathe. The rise and fall of her ribs, the raw scrape of skin where the ropes had bitten deep. In the moonlight, she looked small, breakable, but there was nothing weak about the way she held herself, even in pain. I took a step closer. Gravel shifted underfoot, louder than a gunshot in the hush. Her head snapped up, eyes wide and wild. In that flash, I saw the fear, but behind it, the same fire, a spark refusing to die. I raised my empty hand, palm out. The words felt useless. After so many years of silence, speech felt like lifting a weight too heavy to bear. But even without words, something passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or shared defiance. For the first time in nearly a decade, I wasn't alone in the canyons of my guilt. In that breathless space where moonlight met stone, I saw her clearer than before. The shallow rise and fall of her chest, the tremor in her blood-streaked hand, and yet that stubborn line in her jaw refusing to fold. It reminded me so fiercely of the boy I'd failed that it felt like my ribs were being pried apart. For a moment, neither of us moved. The canyon walls pressed in around us, the air so still I could hear my own heartbeat over the whisper of wind scraping past stone. In that silence, I felt the weight of what I had done and what I hadn't done. Helping her escape had been the easy part. Facing her now, seeing the raw cost of her freedom written in cuts and bruises, that was something else entirely. She blinked, and her gaze sharpened. Fear still flickered in her dark eyes, but I saw something more dangerous behind it. Calculation. Even half hidden in shadow, she was measuring me the way a fox measures the distance to an open coop door. She didn't trust me. Why should she? I had stood there on that porch, silent as a grave marker, while Kate dragged her forward and shoved her face first into the trough. Only when shame burned hot enough to move me had I acted, and even then, only by accident. That wasn't quite an accident. My mouth felt as dry as the sand underfoot. Words sat heavy on my tongue, unused to being summoned. "I'm not here to hurt you," I rasped, the syllables harsh and awkward in my own ears. She didn't answer, didn't move, but her gaze didn't leave mine. I glanced at the makeshift bandage on her wrist, a strip of torn cloth, soaked dark with blood. The stone she'd used lay beside her, sharp edge dulled by sweat and desperation. Even breathing seemed to hurt her. Her shoulders flinched with each shallow inhale. I stepped closer, slow as dawn. She tensed like a coiled spring, and for a moment I wondered if she'd use what little strength she had left to fight me. But she didn't. She just watched, unblinking. When I was close enough, I lowered the rifle, let it rest against the canyon wall, barrel pointing away. A small gesture, but maybe enough to show her that I wasn't Cade, that I wasn't here to drag her back in chains. The moon slid behind a drifting cloud, and for a breath, the canyon plunged into darkness. In that blind moment, I felt the question in the air between us. Why had I come? The answer tasted of old guilt and something too fragile to name. I came because I had to, because standing by had rotted me to the bone, because a single spark in her eyes had lit something I thought long dead. When the light returned, I could see the pain in her face more clearly. Her lips were cracked from thirst, sweat streaked the dust on her skin, and yet she still wouldn't look away. It shamed me, that strength. I had all the advantages: food, water, shelter, and yet it was her who refused to yield. "I have water," I said, voice low. I unslung the canteen from my belt and placed it on the ground between us, not offered by hand. That would have been too much trust to ask for. For a moment she didn't react. Then her eyes flicked to it, and I saw the struggle play out in the tight set of her jaw, pride warring with pain and need. Finally, slowly, she reached out. Her fingers closed around the canteen, knuckles white from the effort. She raised it to her lips and drank small sips at first, cautious, as though each drop might burn. Watching her drink felt like relief and shame tangled together. Relief that she might live another hour. Shame that it had taken me so long to offer even this. She stopped before finishing it, and her gaze met mine again. For the first time, it felt less like a challenge and more like a question. What now? I sat on the ground, cross-legged, putting space between us. The night air smelled of sage and dust. Somewhere far off, a coyote called a lonely sound, echoing off stone and memory alike. I forced the words out. "Cade will come back," I said. The name tasted bitter. "He won't stop." She didn't answer, but the way her shoulders stiffened told me she understood. "I know these canyons," I continued, voice rough from disuse. "I can help you hide, or find a way through." My words hung in the air, uncertain, as brittle as dry twigs. She studied me, not just my face, but the way I sat, the wear on my clothes, the scars on my hands. I could almost feel her weighing my offer against the cost of trust. And why should she trust me? A man who had stood silent while cruelty happened at his doorstep. A man who had built a life from running away. But silence had cost enough, and the desert doesn't forgive cowardice any more than war does. The moon slipped free of the cloud, lighting her face again. I saw something shift in her gaze, not acceptance, not trust, but maybe the faintest crack in the wall between us. She nodded, once small but enough. In that quiet gesture, I felt a weight settle on my chest, heavier than any rifle. Helping her escape had been reckless, but guiding her, now choosing to stand with her against Cade and his men, that was a choice with no return. A choice that would burn every bridge I had left to the quiet life I'd built. But as the wind stirred the dust around us, I realized something. Maybe that was what I'd needed all along. Not walls to keep the past out, but something worth breaking them for. The night stretched out around us like a black ocean, deep and endless. The canyon walls closed in tight, shadows pooling like ink in every crevice and fold. It felt like the world had shrunk to nothing more than the two of Usown man chasing ghosts of his past, and a young woman fighting to claim a future. I still didn't know her name. Somehow it didn't matter yet. What mattered was the raw, undeniable truth in that moment. We were bound by necessity, and something heavier be pain, survival, and a shared enemy. She shifted beside me, the worn cloth wrapped tight around her bleeding wrist. I could see the stubborn set of her jaw even in the dim moonlight. Pain sharpened her features, but so did defiance. She was a flame flickering against the wind, refusing to be snuffed out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of cloth, clean, dry. Not much, but it was something. I motioned, offering it silently. For a long moment she hesitated, then accepted it with trembling hands. I could feel the weight of trust passing between us like a fragile thread. As she worked the cloth around her wrist, tightening it to staunch the bleeding, I sat back against the rock and let out a slow breath. The stillness was deceptive inside me. A storm was raging. Guilt clawed at my chest. Rage simmered beneath the surface. And beneath it all, a stubborn spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I should have done more, I whispered, voice low enough that only the desert wind could hear. Back then and now. She glanced at me, eyes reflecting the moonlight, but said nothing. Some wounds ran too deep for words. The truth was, I didn't deserve to help her, not after all I'd left behind. But helping her had become the only thing that made sense, the only way I could stop running from myself, from the past. We settled into a tense silence, broken only by the distant cry of a coyote. The desert night held a cold bite, but the fire inside me burned hotter than ever. I knew Cade wouldn't give up. He never did, and neither could I. When I spoke again, my voice was firmer. We need to move before dawn. They'll be searching, and if they find us... She cut me off, voice steady despite the pain. I'm not going back. Her words hit me harder than any bullet ever had. There was no fear, no pleading, just raw, unyielding resolve. It was a challenge and a promise all at once. I nodded, understanding what she meant. Running wasn't an option anymore for either of us. Survival meant fighting. Fighting not just for our lives, but for the broken pieces of our souls. The moon shifted behind a cloud again, and I felt the weight of the rifle against my shoulder. It was more than a weapon. It was a reminder of what I was, of who I could still be. We rose slowly, shadows stretching long and thin as the first hints of dawn began to tinge the eastern sky. My eyes scanned the canyon mouth, no sign of movement yet, but time was running out. As we crept forward, the land seemed to hold its breath. The harsh lines of rock softened in the morning light, but the danger lurking in the distance remained as real as ever. I caught a glimpse of her face, pale but determined, and I realized something profound. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about redemption. For both of us, the path ahead was treacherous, filled with uncertainty and pain, but for the first time in years I felt ready to face whatever lay beyond these canyons, to face Cade, the past, and my own fractured soul. Because sometimes it's only when the desert swallows you whole that you find out what you're really made of. The first light of dawn wasn't mercy, it was a warning. Pale streaks of color bled into the sky, washing out the stars and casting the jagged canyon walls into sharp relief. The desert had no patience for the weak, and daybreak meant Cade and his men would soon be stirring. We moved quietly, boots muffled against loose gravel and sand, shadows blending into the folds of the rock like ghosts. The girl's pace was steady despite the pain etched into every step. I marveled at the raw will in her. Every limp, every grimace told stories of battles far beyond my own. She was more than a survivor. She was a storm waiting to break. The rifle felt heavier with every moment. It was a reminder of all the violence I thought I'd left behind, and a promise that sometimes you have to carry the weight of the past to face the future. My fingers brushed the worn wood, tracing the scars I'd earned in other wars I had lost, long before the battle was over. I thought about Miller, the kid from Ohio who'd never see another sunrise. I thought about the hesitation that had frozen me, the shot I hadn't taken, the man I'd stopped being. And then I looked at her, this fierce, unbroken flame, and I realized that the man I wanted to be was still buried beneath the dust and regret. "Can you keep going?" I asked without looking back. My voice was low, careful not to break the fragile quiet. She nodded, eyes fixed ahead. There was no room for weakness in that gaze, only the fierce determination of someone who had already lost too much to turn back now. We slipped deeper into the canyon maze, the walls closing around us like the fingers of an ancient, unforgiving hand. The air was cooler here, tinged with the scent of creosote and dry earth, but every step was a gamble. One wrong move could send us tumbling down a cliff or breaking an ankle that wouldn't heal. I kept my senses sharp, every sound amplified in the canyon's silence, the scrape of rock, the distant call of a hawk, the subtle crunch of footsteps behind us. The desert was alive with threats, and Cade's hunters were closer than we liked to think. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth and turning sweat into salt on my skin. My throat was dry, my legs heavy, but I pushed on. There was no turning back. Not for her, not for me. Around midday, we found a narrow cave nestled between two towering cliffs. The shadows inside promised shade and cover, a moment's respite from the relentless sun. I helped her inside, sitting her down gently against the cool stone. She looked up at me, eyes sharp and wary. "You're risking a lot," she said quietly, voice hoarse but steady. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out a small pouch of jerky and a battered canteen of water. I handed them to her. Survival wasn't just about fighting, it was about holding on to whatever humanity you could in a world that tried to strip it away. As she ate, I studied her face. There was a story there, hidden beneath layers of pain and pride. I wanted to know, it needed to, if we were going to make it through this alive. "Why did you fight Cade?" I asked gently, breaking the silence. Her eyes darkened, shadows flickering across her face. "Because no one else would," she said simply. "Because giving up means death." Her words struck a chord deep inside me. I knew that feeling all too well. I'd spent years trying to forget the pain by burying it beneath silence and solitude. But pain has a way of clawing back to the surface when you least expect it. We sat there for a long time, sharing the silence between us. Two wounded souls bound by circumstance. The desert was unforgiving, but it was also honest. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more than survival. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, I knew the real test was coming. Cade wouldn't stop until he found her. And if he did, it wouldn't just be her life. On the line, it would be mine too. I tightened my grip on the rifle and looked out toward the darkening horizon. The desert was vast, brutal, and beautiful in its own way. It didn't care about past mistakes or regrets. It only cared about who was left standing when the dust finally settled. And this time, I was ready to stand. The night swallowed the canyon like a hungry beast, leaving only slivers of moonlight to guide us. The air grew colder, the desert's harsh breath turning sharp against my skin. Every step I took was careful. deliberate, each one weighted with the knowledge that Cade's men were closing in. Somewhere out there, in the black folds of the desert night, danger moved with cruel purpose. I glanced sideways at her, the girl with fire still burning in her eyes despite the blood and bruises. She was quiet, her breath shallow but steady. Even in exhaustion, there was a stubborn strength to her that I hadn't seen in a long time. That kind of strength was rare. It was the kind that didn't break under pressure, the kind that could survive hell itself. "Keep close," I whispered. "We don't have much time." She nodded, shifting her weight carefully on her injured leg. I could see the pain flare behind her gaze, but she didn't slow down. There was no room for weakness here, not when the hunt was on. The canyon twisted and turned like a labyrinth, every corner a potential trap. I kept the rifle ready, senses stretched to their limits, scanning for the slightest hint of movement. The desert was silent but deadly. Even a whisper could give us away. My mind flashed back to that moment years ago, Wolf Pass, the hesitation that had cost Miller his life, that split second of doubt, that frozen finger on the trigger. The weight of that failure had hung on me like a curse ever since. But this time, there would be no hesitation, no faltering. This time, I was ready to face the darkness head on. Suddenly, a faint noise barely more than a breath echoed off the rocks ahead. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. A shadow moved, low and fast. Without thinking, I raised the rifle, sighting along the barrel. The figure stopped, and for a moment, the desert held its breath. It was her. She had paused, looking back over her shoulder, eyes wide and alert. The hunt was close, too close. I motioned for her to move, to keep going. There was no time for words, only the desperate urgency of survival. We pressed on, the canyon narrowing into a jagged choke point where the walls seemed to close in, trapping the air and sound like a cage. The ground beneath us was uneven, sharp rocks threatening to send us sprawling at any misstep. I could feel every muscle straining, every breath a battle against exhaustion and fear. Then, from the shadows behind, came the unmistakable sound of hooves. A harsh, guttural shout echoed through the canyon, and my blood ran cold. Cade's men had found us. "No," I muttered, voice tight with rage and resolve. I pulled her behind a boulder, pressing my back against the cool stone as the riders thundered past, hooves pounding like war drums. Their voices faded into the distance, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they circled back. "We can't stay here," I said, voice low but urgent. "They'll come looking," she nodded, eyes fierce and unyielding. "Then we keep moving." We slipped through a narrow crevice, the rocks scraping against our clothes as we descended into a hidden ravine. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, leaving us in a world of shadows and whispers. I could feel the weight of my past pressing down on me, every mistake, every moment of silence that had allowed cruelty to thrive. But here, with her at my side, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared hope for in years: redemption. We weren't just running from Cade. We were running towards something, a chance to fight back, a chance to rewrite the story we'd both been trapped in. The canyon opened up into a small clearing, bathed in the pale light of stars. I knelt beside her, pulling out a small bandage from my pack and carefully tending to her wounds. She flinched, but didn't pull away. Trust was building, fragile and slow. "We're not safe yet," I said quietly, "but we'll make it. I promise." Her eyes met mine, shining with a mix of gratitude and fierce determination. In that moment, I knew we were bound by more than necessity. We were bound by a shared will to survive and to fight. As the night deepened around us, I sat back against a rock, rifle resting across my knees, and let the silence settle. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone in it. And I wasn't going to run anymore. The dawn wasn't kind. It came slow and heavy, bleeding through the cracks in the rocky canyon walls, painting the world in shades of dusty orange and fading blue. The desert's harsh light revealed every harsh edge, every scar on the earth hand, every bruise on her skin. We had spent the night huddled in that narrow clearing, the silence between us, thick but necessary. Neither of us slept much. The desert was too alive, too unforgiving. The distant echo of Cade's men was a reminder that this wasn't a sanctuary. It was just the pause before the storm. I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down like the sun's relentless glare. Every step we took from here on out would carve a path either toward freedom or destruction. She woke first, her movements cautious and deliberate, wincing as she shifted her injured leg. Her eyes caught mine in the half-light, a silent question hanging between us. How much further could she go? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. We packed up quickly, the sounds of the waking desert around us, scars of ravens, the scrape of lizards over sun-baked stone, the faint rustle of wind brushing dry sagebrush, each sound a reminder that life, no matter how fragile, still pulsed fiercely here. Our path led deeper into the canyon maze, where the air grew cooler and the shadows stretched longer. Every step was a gamble, every breath measured. The desert was a cruel teacher, punishing any sign of weakness without hesitation. As we moved, I found myself stealing glances at her, not out of pity, but out of respect. This girl, this fierce creature of dust and defiance, carried a fire that was contagious. It lit something inside me that I thought had been snuffed out long ago. "We need to reach the old trail," I said, voice low. "It's the only way out without being caught." She nodded, lips pressed tight in determination. I could see the lines of pain etched in her face, but there was no giving up. Not now. The hours dragged on under the unforgiving sun. Our shadows lengthened and shrank, shifting with the sun's relentless arc. I carried the rifle, but more than that, I carried the weight of every wrong I'd ever done and the hope that maybe, this time, I could make things right. The desert seemed endless, a cruel expanse of stone and sand and sun, but with every step I felt a strange kind of clarity. The silence I'd clung to for years was breaking apart, replaced by a new noise, the steady beat of purpose. When we finally reached the ridge, overlooking the old trail, I paused. The view stretched out before us, a narrow dirt path, winding like a thread through the rocky landscape, flanked by scrub and thorn. I could see movement, far off dust clouds, rising in the distance, the telltale sign of horses, Cade's men. "They're closing in," I said, voice tight with urgency. "We don't have much time." She looked at me then, eyes fierce and unyielding. "Then we fight," she said simply, "or we die trying." Her words hit me harder than any bullet ever could. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming something lost in ore. Freedom, a chance to stand tall against the darkness. We prepared ourselves in the shadow of the ridge, choosing our ground carefully. The terrain was jagged and uneven, perfect for ambush if we used it right. The rifle was loaded, the small knife at my belt felt heavier with promise. As the dust clouds grew nearer, I felt the fire in my chest flare. No more running, no more silence. When Cade's riders crested the ridge, they found not a broken man and a captive, but two ghosts ready to haunt them. The first shot rang out sharp and clear, echoing off the canyon walls. The hunt had become a battle. The air shattered with the crack of gunfire, sharp, sudden and final. The echo bounced off the canyon walls like the howl of a wounded animal. For years I had tried to bury the sounds of battle deep beneath silence and dust. But now, those echoes stirred again, resurrected by necessity and fury. Cade's riders scattered like startled crows, the first volley cutting through their ranks with brutal precision. The girl beside me moved like a shadow, nimble and fierce, her eyes blazing with the fire of someone who'd stared death in the face and spat in its direction. I realized then this wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a reckoning. For every wrong committed, every moment of silence, every regret that had weighed on my soul for nearly a decade, the canyon floor was chaos, whispers of dust, the acrid scent of gunpowder, the thunder of hooves, and the ragged breaths of men who knew this night might be their last. I fired again, heart pounding, hands steadied despite the adrenaline storm raging through my veins. Each shot was a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for a chance to make things right. The girl was a force of nature. Her movements were fluid, every step deliberate as she darted between rocks, wielding a knife with desperate skill. I could hear the grunts of men who underestimated her, their surprise turning quickly to fear. One rider charged close, sword raised to strike. I pushed the girl aside and raised the rifle, the butt crashing against his jaw before the shot found its mark. The man crumpled, eyes wide with shock and pain. Cade's voice cut through the turmoil, a twisted, angry howl filled with hatred and disbelief. He was no longer the arrogant soldier I'd once known. The years had sharpened his cruelty into something far more dangerous. "Thorn," he bellowed, his voice a curse wrapped in venom. "You think this ends here? I'll hunt you to the edges of the earth." I felt a cold fury rise, a storm that had been building since Wolf Pass. This was the moment I'd been running from, and now it demanded everything. The girl caught my eye, nodding fiercely. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for both of us, for a future carved out of the dust and shadows. We fought through the night, every breath a battle, every moment a fight against the inevitable. The canyon became a crucible, forging us into something new, something stronger. When the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Cade's forces were broken, scattered like ash on the wind. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of what had been lost, what had been gained. I looked at the girl beside me, sweat and blood streaking her face. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd never find again. Hope. We were still alive, still standing, and for now that was enough. The dawn was a pale, unforgiving thing, bleeding light over a canyon still heavy with the scent of gunpowder and sweat. The night's battle had left scars in the earth and in our bodies. My arms ached from holding the rifle steady. My breath came in ragged bursts. But the fight was far from over. Cade's retreat was broken and desperate, but I knew he wouldn't surrender so easily. He was a shadow I'd carried for years, an unrelenting ghost chasing the sins I'd tried to bury in silence and dust. I glanced at the girl, who was sitting on a rock, her face drawn but fierce. Her name was Kia, though I'd only learned it hours ago. It felt strange, somehow, putting a name to someone who had become a reason to keep moving, a symbol of defiance that had reignited something inside me I thought was long dead. "We need to move," I said, voice low but steady. "He'll regroup. We can't wait here." Kia nodded, pushing herself up despite the pain in her leg. There was a stubborn grace in her movement, a refusal to be defined by wounds or fear. I admired her for that more than I could say. We took the narrow path along the canyon's edge, careful to keep to the shadows. Every sound seemed amplified in the heavy silence. Every rustle of brush a potential threat. Cade's men were hunters, ruthless and resourceful. They wouldn't stop until they had us. As we moved, memories crashed through me. Wolf Pass, Miller's lifeless eyes, the hesitation that had marked the moment I lost a part of myself. But this time the hesitation was gone. In its place was a fierce determination to protect what little light remained. The desert stretched out before us, brutal and beautiful in its harshness. It demanded everything: strength, cunning, and sometimes sacrifice. We crossed a dry creek bed, the cracked earth crunching beneath our boots. I stopped, scanning the horizon. The rising sun cast long shadows, painting the world in gold and blood. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the haze-cade, alone but deadly, his face twisted in a mask of rage and obsession. "You can't run forever, Thorn," he spat, hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "This ends today." I steadied my breath, the weight of years pressing down on me. The man I had been, the soldier frozen by fear, was gone. Now I was something different, something forged in pain and fire. "This ends when I say it does," I replied, voice calm but hard as stone. Kia stepped beside me, eyes blazing. We weren't just standing against Cade, we were standing for something greater: redemption, justice, survival. The desert held its breath as the final reckoning began. The sun climbed higher, but the real battle was inside me, the fight to reclaim my soul and protect the spark of hope I'd found in a fierce young woman's eyes. The dust swirled around us, the canyon walls bearing silent witness to a man who had chosen to stop running, to face the past, to fight for a future. The desert sun was merciless, beating down on cracked earth and jagged stone, as if it wanted to burn away the past itself. But here, on this ancient battleground carved by time and silence, the ghosts of yesterday clashed with the will to reclaim tomorrow. Cade stood across from me, a twisted mask of fury and obsession. His pistol rested heavy in his hand, but I saw beyond the weapon toe the man behind it, broken and consumed by hatred. He was a shadow chasing a ghost, and that ghost was me. Beside me, Kia's eyes burned fierce, an unyielding flame refusing to be extinguished by years of cruelty and silence. Together, we were no longer hunted, we were hunters. The balance had shifted. The canyon around us seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension and dust. Time itself stretched thin, every second heavy with the weight of what was to come. Cade sneered, voice dripping with venom. You think you can erase the past? You're a coward hiding behind silence. But I know the truth. I saw your hesitation. I watched you fail. His words struck like bullets, aimed at the scars I'd carried for years. But I was no longer that man, the broken soldier frozen in doubt. I was a man forged in regret and redemption, a man who had chosen to act when silence had been easier. I leveled my rifle, voice steady and cold. The past doesn't define me anymore. You do. The final showdown was brutal and swift. Shots echoed off the canyon walls, mixing with the harsh breaths and pounding hearts of three people bound by history and survival. Cade's rage made him reckless, and that was his downfall. When the dust settled, Cade lay broken, the fire in his eyes snuffed out by his own obsession. I looked at Kia, still standing strong despite the blood and pain, and felt the surge of something I hadn't known in yearshope. The desert, ruthless and unyielding, had witnessed countless endings, but today it bore witness to a beginning. We were survivors, scarred but unbroken, bound not by chains but by choice. Together we faced the endless horizon, knowing the road ahead would be hard but ours. The silence I'd once sought was gone, replaced by the steady rhythm of purpose. The past was a weight lifted, the future a path forged in courage and fire. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and blood, I knew one thing for certain. Some ghosts don't haunt you forever. Sometimes they lead you home. If you were in his shoes, would you have fought the same battle? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video. While you're here, explore the other videos waiting for you on screen. There's plenty more stories to discover.